Hi, BBD, and welcome to this year's International Women's Day, 2023, where we're celebrating embracing equity and all of that means. And what a wonderful occasion, and what a wonderful time to stop and think. Those of you that know me will know I do not like celebrating things like Women's Day because I don't believe we should have only one day in our lives where we think about inclusion and where we think about what women in the workplace, women in tech, or inclusion in general and diversity mean for us. But here we are, so let's celebrate it. And maybe just to share some thoughts for you all, something to think about as we go into this panel conversation. What does equity mean, and what does embracing equity mean? What does International Women's Day mean? And I think to me, it really means a time where we can stop and think, what am I doing to be the change that I want to see? Because when we think about inclusion, oftentimes we can start to think about how we're on the wrong side of it, or how we're in a minority. And women in tech, we're in such a minority. We're 18 to 22%, depending on how you do the numbers. In big tech, we're less than 10%. In investment into women in tech, we're less than 1% in Europe, and less than 3% globally into women-founded tech initiatives. And so we've got such a long way to go. And we can sometimes think, what is everyone else doing about this? But I think today is a day where we should be thinking, what can I do? And what is the commitment I can make for the year ahead to make sure we take even one step further or one leap further? Or how do I make inclusion a part of everything that I do? And how do I remember women in tech in every day and not just today in March? And so hopefully that gives you something to think about. And I hope you enjoy the panel. I'm sure it's going to be very insightful. I wish I could have been there to debate with you all. But let's keep the conversation going. And I invite you all to join this conversation and to make it a year of conversation about inclusion. This year, we're going to do something a little bit different on International Women's Day. We are going to make it about how we can all be the change. And we're going to think about how we can each pledge to be that change for BBD. And each of you are going to be invited to make a commitment for this year on what you pledge to do. And so I will kick it off with publicly committing my pledge. And my pledge is always to have those difficult conversations and to ensure that in everything we do, in every meeting, in every conversation, that we don't forget that we have an inclusion objective as well. And so my pledge is to include inclusion in our business objective and make sure that conversation stays well and alive for 2023. I can't wait to see all of your pledges too. And I hope that you can all really dig deep and think about something meaningful to you that you can change this year.
Cool. Thanks for joining us today. And I just want to wish everybody a happy Women's Day, International Women's Day. And as Liesel mentioned in her quick little video, marketing is kind of coordinated that everybody writes up a short and sweet pledge for the year ahead. So as we're going through this panel, if everybody could give a think about what they could kind of do to embrace equity in your daily life over the next year. And either you can tweet that. So we are currently using the hashtag BBD Embrace Equity, or you can even email it to marketing and it will be included on our little microsite, which you can go and have a look at women.bbdsoftware.com. So today we have got our panelists here. Most of you guys know Lucky, Mika, and Tori. And in Cape Town, Charlene is joining us as well. So let's dive into it. So my first question is actually for Tori. How can we work together across industries and communities to create a more equitable and inclusive future for women in tech?
So I think that solving equality and equity really starts at the individual level, because at the end of the day, all organizations and industries are just a sum of its parts, which is us. So if the individual really tries to embrace equality, or no, not really equality, but more diversity in all spheres of their life, you can start to become more comfortable with people who are different to you. And that makes it easier to instill trust in people who are different to you or not conventionally suited for a specific role. So things like going to a pride parade, listening to music from an artist that you might not listen to um, all the time, or even, you know, like provide mentorship opportunities for people who aren't that similar to you, become friends with people who aren't that similar to you. Once we embrace diversity in our personal lives, that makes it easier to embrace in our work lives, which, you know, makes it easier for people to enter into different industries where maybe they don't feel comfortable. Yeah, starts at the individual level.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. We are all responsible for kind of doing that, embracing that on our daily lives. But there is obviously a role for organizations to play as well. So, Lucky, I was hoping you could chat to us a little bit about sort of the initiatives or programs that BBD have, which really support and empower women in tech.
Sure. Good morning. It's a bit of a difficult panel to be sitting on. I think first we have to ask the question with everything that we do is, what is our objective? What is our end goal? And one of the things that I truly like about the way we do things at BBD is that with everything we do, we ask ourselves what is the value in what we're doing, firstly, and then secondly, are we maintaining the high quality of work that we want to put out there? So for us as a team and as an organization, our main goal is to create opportunities for people that would otherwise not have been exposed to those opportunities. People that definitely have the skills, people that definitely have the expertise and the capability to do that. And we really look and put in the effort to go and find them wherever they are. So to give you an example, last year we started a program called Iksasa Letu, where on Saturdays we were teaching high school kids that most of which have never even used a computer before, on firstly how to use a computer and then how to start learning how to program. And so we're doing this in partnership with a bunch of high schools across Joburg at the moment. And this is on a Saturday, and we're getting our grads involved in those initiatives as well. So we do two things there. Firstly, we're going out there and finding young, talented people that would have otherwise been marginalized, but also we're slowly conscientizing our own grads and our own staff about the power that they have to really bring about transformation in all of their spheres. So we do that while maintaining this critical balance of making sure that we don't drop the quality of persons that we bring into the organization and in the value that we deliver to everyone that we interact with.
Um, I think we can kind of all agree that this conversation is important in every single industry, but more so here in the tech industry, which has historically remained very much male dominated. So I'd like to hear from Charlene how you believe technology and software development can play a role in promoting gender equality here at BBD, but also in like a larger societal landscape.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, I've got a bit of feedback on my side. Okay. Um, so I had a little giggle on the side, Lucky, when you made a comment around being a difficult panel to sit on, right? And funnily enough, I think about that in the answer to that question is really I'm pretty sure all of us at some stage in our life have felt like we just don't fit in, like awkward, uncomfortable, right? Whether that's standing around a braai with the boys on a rugby day, or maybe maybe your parents' judgmental friends come over for dinner to the house, or maybe even being at a baby shower. So, so software development itself, in my mind, is impartial by nature. So our computers have no concept of gender, and neither does our output. As a software professional, you walk into a business like BB&D, surrounded by enthusiastic technologists, and before long, you find yourself swept into what feels like a secret world filled with technical jargon and nerdy jokes, a world where yeah, gender feels irrelevant, and you feel like you finally found your people, like you belong.
Thank you. I mean, you know, once you've kind of entered the industry, you can kind of get a feel for that. But how do we, this is for you, Mika, how do we actually encourage more women to pursue careers in technology and support their professional growth once they get into the field?
I think focusing first on encouraging women to actually get into the field more so than ever, especially with 2023, the word representation matters most. I think putting people in spaces where they have such a large amount of information at their disposal that they can share with other people, but then also people that don't happen to be in those spaces as often is extremely important. So, for example, with me, when I was in high school, I was one of 15 people that took IT, and that was also including the teacher, as also there were 15 people in the class. And out of the 15 people, there were only 4 girls, including the teacher. She was also she was the IT teacher, and she was the one person that inspired not just the women but also the men as well by destigmatizing IT in general. That it's not as difficult as the world wants to put out there. As a developer right now, I can say that, okay, cool, IT at the moment is quite tricky, but I was encouraged as hell when I was able to console log hello world and see it on my screen. So just being able to destigmatize IT and at the same time having people who are not necessarily always in the limelight in this field actually be put out there is what I think would encourage women to get into IT. And then once they're actually in this field, to kind of combat imposter syndrome. So for those who don't know what imposter syndrome is, um, it's a moment where you feel like you're in a specific field, but you feel like you don't actually belong there. So once you're actually in the field, cement yourself. Don't don't succumb to the difficulties that IT as a field in general could have. Yeah.
Can I also add on? Go for it. So often, like young women and women in general have, or what I've observed, and I'm sure a lot of other people have, is something like a technical helplessness, that whenever something needs to be fixed, they need to ask a man, or if they're having a problem with like a technical issue with their computer, a man has to fix it, even though they have just as much exposure to this computer as a man. So, encouraging girls to fix their own problems, because there's no reason why you can't. And the sense of reward that comes out of that is like a little rush. And then that inspires, women to become problem solvers. Yeah.
Thank you. That's actually, yeah, I'm like, I lean into like damsel in distress mode all the time. So it's quite interesting that you brought that up. Yeah, so I mean, this one's for Charlene. How do you believe we can create a more inclusive and diverse tech culture within BBD where everyone feels valued and supported regardless of their gender?
So I think that creating any positive change first requires acceptance, and in this case, radical acceptance. Acceptance that we are all different in so many ways, thousands of ways, um, and in all those thousands of differences, our gender is just one data point. One out of thousands, thousands. So with gender itself being such a minority in the thousands of differences, impartiality must reign. And the improvement comes with a choice that every single one of us need to make every single day. And that choice is for us to focus not on our differences, but to focus on our similarities, our shared joys, our shared passions. Focus on that, because that is when I believe the magic of support shines, and where I think we feel really, truly valued.
If I may, I think I agree with Charlene in the fact that we need to accept that everyone is an individual. And I think once you start working in teams where you accept that each and every single person is different, start thinking about how do we structure how we operate and how we work to be the most productive. So I'll give you an example. If I've got a team and I've worked in a team where our stand-up was, say, at 8 a.m., but one member of the team was constantly late, And no matter how many times we spoke to her, it was a big problem. Until we said, okay, let's take a look at the individual problem and speak to the individual about why is it a problem, until we realized that this person needed to drop a child off at daycare before coming to work. And using public transport, this made it quite difficult for them to get to the office by 8, which means that this person would get here about 10 past 8, quarter past 8. And by simply looking at the person as an individual and the circumstances around them, we simply moved stand up to 8:30. This had no impact on our productivity as a team, but what we did by looking at how do we incorporate everyone as an individual, we transformed our space. This person was able, firstly, to come into work relaxed without running, without their heart pumping, without feeling guilty, and they were able to produce and feel safe in our space. And just by having that conversation, we were able to create something where this person is able to speak to us about anything else that they're struggling with. And by looking at everyone in the team as individuals and together deciding how we operate, that really transformed how we produced as a team. So I think I agree with Charlene in that once you start looking at people as individuals and the context in which they work in, we can definitely create a much more inclusive and productive space.
Yeah, it's like a small incremental change that has a massive impact. And that goes back. So I hope you're all thinking about doing your pledges. Don't forget that. So I've got a last one for Mika and Tori as women who are currently here and doing the thing. What is your advice for young women wanting to pursue a career in this field? And also, what has your experience at BBD been like so far?
Okay. I think my advice for women that would, sorry, is it women that advice for women that want to get into the field?
Young girls.
Okay, yeah, okay. So my advice for women that would want to get into the field is, again, kind of leaning back to the point that I had before, probably being able to destigmatize that image that IT has, that IT is not necessarily just a bunch of developers, that you can utilize your most strongest part of yourself. So say, for example, you're creative at heart. You don't just have to be a programmer, you could be a UX designer. Or if you are fantastic with people and you know how to solve problems, especially when it comes to like dealing with maybe client issues versus developer issues, project organizer versus project manager. Point to say is that there's not just a one size fits all kind of role in the IT field, and you should use your strongest suit as a means of tackling or as a means of finding the best role for you in this field. And my experience here, great. Yeah. Honestly, I think what BBD does best, especially with regards to people that are not entirely sure to what field they want to go to, is that they expose you to almost everything. Like we don't just have, like I said, the one size fits all role here. There's different roles that you feel like you can maybe try and fit your shoe into or put your foot into. And if it doesn't work, then there's another role that you can try. Yeah.
So, in terms of advice for girls and women wanting to get into tech, there's this phrase that people often use that biologically men are more drawn to things and women are more drawn to people. So, things related problem, jobs that deal with things and require an obsession with things are more suited to men, and uh, careers that are more people related are better suited for women. So I think that if that is a biological thing, I think humanity is at a point where we are able to overcome our biological limitations. We can have cancer and still survive. So we don't you are allowed to be a woman and be obsessed with things. You
Can I
shouldn't have
comment on that?
yeah.
I just,
Certainly.
Tori, just to add to your comments about whether or not that's it's a biological thing for women to be more sort of drawn towards people. I mean, at the end of the day, although we all work on computers, okay, um, we don't work with computers. We work with people, and that is our primary part of our role, right? Working with people, and those people happen to know how to make computers do amazing things.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And it's such an important thing to get that balance between perspectives and concerns from, and that's the point of, diversifying a workspace. But, you know, you are allowed to have an obsession with things if you are a woman. And you are allowed to be an engineer, and you are allowed to be technical, and you're allowed to feel comfortable without people, associating you with more soft problems, because then, you become associated as being with being a good engineer rather than being soft skill representation in a team. Like, yeah, you can solve your own technical problems, but obviously it is good to have a diverse set of skills, no matter who you are. But yeah, so don't think that it's tech is an inherently male space because of the things that that are dealt with. Then, in terms of my experience at BBD, being a woman, I've been really impressed with the way BBD deals with empowering women. And, if I have a concern, I have spoken to people in charge with concerns that I have. They've been dealt with immediately, and that's been really great. It would be naive to say that there's no problems at all, biases don't exist. But I think it's something that people at BBD like to work on and like to improve on, and there's generally a good initiative for change, an initiative to grow and to evolve. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask our panel?
What are your individual pledges?
Okay, I can start then with that. Pardon? Okay, so my individual pledge is to understand the severity of being placed in a position where I have to be a representative, especially for people of marginalized groups, particularly in my situation as a Black woman in tech. That when I do represent that, I represent honestly and also truthfully as well.
So when I was thinking about what to say for this and what to make my pledge, I really had to dig deep and kind of look introspectively at how I deal with my own bias. So I can think of this one story. It happened last year or something. I was looking at tutorials on how to do things, and there was this one tutorial, and it was exactly what I was looking for, but it was a tutorial by a woman. And for some reason, I was like, okay, I need to refine my search a bit more because, like, inherently, like, I'm sure it's something that a lot of people do. It's like you just don't have the same trust. So I really want to recognize and acknowledge my own implicit biases, my own implicit bias, and kind of, call myself out, and encourage other people to call themselves out and put my pride aside, to encourage myself to diversify my life.
Even me. I think I was largely covered, but I think personally for me, I'd like to be a safe space for people to come and be vulnerable. Whether it's people that feel that the space isn't for them, as well as people who are trying to learn and grow beyond what they've known and their own lived experiences. So just to be that safe space for people to come and be vulnerable. It's me.
I love that, Lucky, and I think that it's a nice reminder that to be vulnerable requires a huge amount of strength. So I think to also take the whole stigma away from vulnerability is that to be truly vulnerable, you need to be very strong. So that's great. My pledge. Okay, so my pledge was I kind of I found it easy to think of but difficult to put into words because it was something that I quite intentionally started working on making changes for last year to the second half of last year, but still continues to be my pledge for this year, which is to actively work towards creating a more equitable and inclusive world for all genders. So, with that, to advocate for positive practices that promote gender equity. And I'm very explicit when I don't refer explicitly to a particular gender, I refer to all genders quite actively.
Lucky. Just in response, I think I can confidently say for quite a lot of people, you are already a safe space, so you're killing it.
Any other questions from anyone?
Sorry, yeah, I can't resist a microphone. Just Lucky, I think what you said resonates quite strongly with me, but a question, I guess, to all the women out there. And, you know, some of you are confident enough to actually approach with an issue and be confident enough that it's not going to result in some sort of negative, you know, thoughts around your approach. And so what are your thoughts around being able to approach senior people in the business about just having honest conversations? Does it ever not feel like a safe space to any of you as a man of interest?
No, I actually that's one of my favorite parts about BBD is that I've had conversations with people in charge about these kinds of things, and I've questioned them and had these hard discussions, and I've never felt like I couldn't. There's often times where you notice people's pride, where you notice that people get defensive. But then often, with the conversations that you have, that gets smoothed out. And yeah, there's the general culture of inclusivity and, being able to speak to people in charge. Yeah, which is a really cool part about BBD.
Yeah, just to echo on that, I also agree with you, Tori. I don't think I've ever had situations where if I was uncomfortable with something, especially something that probably happens in my like work life that may seem like inappropriate, I don't have a problem having to speak to senior executives. So, for example, with Esty, when I had a situation, I was able to speak to her comfortably, and she was able to help me trudge through that issue. And even if, for example, I do have a difficulty addressing something to a senior exec, I do have people that may relate to me in some way in BBD that I don't feel like entirely uncomfortable speaking about, that could help me guide, okay, maybe this is the way that you should approach it, maybe approach it this way instead. So I don't feel entirely ostracized whenever I do feel something, whenever I do experience something horrible. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think just from my side, I mean, I was really taken aback and really impressed last year. There was an occasion where one of our directors actually sent an email to a couple of the women on the email trail in a typical logical problem solving manner, and said, he would like to check a decision that he's making because, it's come to his thought that, he doesn't want this to, reflect differently, and he'd like our opinion. I think, it was related to maternity or something along those lines. And I thought it was absolutely awesome that, he acknowledged that this is something that he needs to look at and he needs to hear and he needs to make a fair, honest decision on. And he wants input from people with, from different age groups and different diverse backgrounds in order to make that decision. So I was super impressed, and I think that that also shows a lot about the culture in our business, right from our leadership from the top through the business.
Any other questions? Anybody? All right, cool. I think that concludes our panel. Again, I'm going to encourage everybody to make a pledge. I know it is kind of tricky. It's like, where do I start? What do I even say? So please, let's keep the conversation going. If you want some ideas, come and chat to anybody in marketing. We're all very passionate about it. And whether or not you are aware, everybody has sort of a sphere of influence in their lives that they can actually make like some positive impact. So yeah, soon we're gonna have a nice high tea themed lunch. So everybody enjoy that. And again, thank you and have a wonderful Women's Day further.